Hi there, welcome to Sanderson Clips. In this session today we're going to look at some ideas around negotiating. So the first thing we want to consider is what are the key stages of negotiations, and you can see here there's 5: preparing, opening, proposing, negotiating and closing. So let's look at each of these in a bit more detail. Preparing. All top negotiators spend lots of time at the preparation stage. And it makes a lot of sense because the more you prepare, the more information you have when you go into the negotiation, probably the more confident you're going to feel. So what are some of the things that we need to consider? Well, part of your preparation should be assessing your shopping list. And what I mean by that is your shopping list is the items that you want to negotiate around when you go to the meeting. So for example, if you get 5 items, that's your shopping list. Also, what you need to do for each of these items is work out what is the ideal outcome and the minimum, the walk away point for each item. And that gives you a range to negotiate. So for example, if you've got an item where you say, ideally if I could get 100 for this, that would be fantastic. But I would also be prepared to settle at the worst on 50. So that gives you quite a bit of scope to negotiate. You may have another item where you say, yeah, ideal if I can get 100. But my walk away, my least is 80, then you get less to negotiate around. And it's really important to understand that before you go into the negotiation and get involved in the heat and the emotions that can take place. Other things you may want to consider is, what about the other people? Do you know them? Have you negotiated with them before? What's their negotiation style like? What could their shopping list be like? And maybe even trying to estimate or assess what you think their minimum and maximum points might be. So preparation is absolutely crucial. The more you prepare, probably the greater your chances of getting what you want once you get to the meeting. The next stage is the opening. This is the first point of physical face-to-face contact, as it were, in the meeting. Now, you need to have some kind of opening strategy. So what I mean by that is, when you go into the meeting, are you prepared to take the lead to do the opening? And if so, what are you going to open with? Are you going to open with, for example, an offer? Or are you going to open with a request for information from them? You need to know what you're going to open with. The other side of the coin here is that you can choose not to open, allow them to open. My own preference is to let the other side open. The reason I say that is, having a long background in sales, I've often found that if I let the other person open, I can gather lots of information very early on in the process here, and that can be useful to compare against maybe any assumptions or any assessments I made at the preparation stage. But there's no right or wrong answer here. You've got to choose what's right for you and what's right for that specific negotiation. The next phase is the proposing stage. Now, I like to call this the testing the water phase. It's a kind of getting to know each other. So you're not negotiating anything yet, you're just testing things out. So maybe you're being a bit speculative, you're making suggestions here, you're asking suggestions there, and this is a stage where you're just getting to know each other. Also, part of what you've got to be doing here is using specific language, and we'll look at that shortly. So you're done your proposing, you're now into the physical act of trading, negotiating, if you like, and this is where your preparation comes in, because if you've completed your shopping list and you know your minimum maximum for each point, you're now going to have to use that when you're negotiating each point. And what that also means is you need a concession strategy. So for example, if you've got what you might class as a low value item, your concession strategy might be, I'm happy to concede in this one fairly easily to get something back. But if one of your items in your shopping list is a high value, big ticket item, it's a must have for you, you must get it, then you'd probably want to concede very, very tough in that one. So maybe in very, very small increments. So make sure you've got a concession strategy. And also, part of the language I've got to use here, you need to use very specific language, and again we'll look at that shortly. And the final part, of course, is a closing. Now, if it's a simple, straightforward negotiation, the closing might just be something like a handshake and an agreement. But of course, in more complex negotiations, particularly in business to business, where they could be multi-meeting, negotiations. So at the end of each phase, you would close and you probably agree to go away and do something, maybe a bit more research, gather more information, and come back to the next meeting. But ultimately, the negotiations got to close anyway, when you get to the final point. And of course, it's really important that you don't just close on a verbal agreement. Get everything in writing. You may have to look at dealing with specialists, for example, legal people and so on, but make sure everything is agreed and everything's agreed in writing. And by the way, the best time to get things agreed in writing is when you're agreeing each point in negotiation. Make sure both parties have got it written down and there's complete understanding, and that'll help with the closing phase. So the next thing we want to look at is power. Who holds power in a negotiation? Not an easy question to answer. And power can be real or power can be perceived. For example, many salespeople think that the buyer or the procurement manager holds the power, but that's not necessarily the case. So one thing that can help us understand power is something called BATNA. So what do we mean here? The BATNA is the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. So for example, if you're going to negotiate with someone and your best alternative to this negotiated agreement is better than what you could get from the negotiation, you've then got to ask yourself, is it worth me negotiating if I've got a better alternative? Because that means your BATNA is pretty strong. It suggests you've got choice. However, if you're going into the negotiation and you don't have any choice, you've got to get a deal. It may well be that your BATNA is very weak and you've got to therefore negotiate very, very carefully. So a simple example here could be, let's say you choose to buy a new car. You've done your research, you know what you want, and you know what the sort of going rate is in terms of cost. So you go into your local car dealer, and for whatever reason you can't agree a deal, you can't agree a price or whatever. So what's your BATNA? Your best alternative is to go to another dealer or maybe buy it from the internet. So you've got choice. So what's the car salesperson's alternative? Well, really nothing. If they don't do a deal with you, they don't sell that car. So the BATNAs are really important because it can affect the balance of power. And as you go through a negotiation and gather more information, that balance of power can change. So you need to be very careful and very clear and listen really well as to what information you're getting during the negotiation. Now the final point here, I mentioned at the proposing stage and the negotiation stage, there's something you have to do is use very specific language. So let's look at what I mean by that. We're talking here about hypothetical and conditional language. So at the proposing stage, because you're speculating and you're testing each other out, you're not actually agreeing anything at that point. So therefore, it's hypothetical. So what that means is you've got to use hypothetical type language. And here's the sort of examples I'm talking about. So you may be saying something like, what if we looked at Y in conjunction with X? Suppose we looked at A. How about we considered Y? This is the language that you use at the proposing stage. It's non-confrontational, it's non-challenging, and it's just a way of opening things up. Now the final part here, crucially, is when you get to the actual negotiating stage where you're negotiating each point. By definition, if you're asking someone for something and you're prepared to give them something back, that's what negotiation is. But that requires conditions to be applied, and the way you apply conditions is by using if and then. So you may be saying something, if you can consider A, then I'm prepared to look at B. That's what we mean by setting conditions. If you're not using if and then, the danger could be that you're giving and not getting something back in return. So another way to look at if and then is to look at the two G's, give and get. So if I give you that, I want to get that back. Okay, well there's some ideas around negotiation, and I hope that helps you, and I'll see you soon.